Today we will take about the Ostrogothic domination in Italy. It's an extremely fascinating topic. Even the period in itself is very particular. We are in the very early Middle Ages. For many people we are still in late antique culture, and I agree with the latter concept, because actually the Italy of the 6th century, previous to the Greek Gothic War, was was actually still a late antique society without any sensible differences. Ostrogothic history is surely really forgotten. The Ostrogoths were destroyed by Belisarius and Narses during the Greek Gothic War, so-called Greek Gothic or Gothic War, in the 30s and 50s of between the 30s and 50s of the 6th century. But previous Ostrogothic history in Italy was actually pretty bright. It was a golden era in many ways, and the Italian case stands out probably because the Ostrogoths realized, together with the local Romano-Italic population, the best experiment, the best and most successful, the one which started with the best foot ever in the Romano-Germanic history, of Romano-Germanic coexistence. In the territories, obviously, of the former Roman Empire. Another aspect that has to be considered is that the Ostrogoths were, in fact, the Eastern Goths, and there had already been the Visigoths in Europe. Actually, the Ostrogoths and Visigoths maintained, when the Kingdom of Italy was formed under Theodoric, a pretty strong relationship for strategical reasons that now we don't have the time to investigate, but that were obviously more important than the mere fact that they came theoretically from the same people, from the same Gothic ancestry. But that had much in common, because also the Visigoths had one of the best experiences in southern France and in Spain of Germanic and say Latin or Celtic Latin coexistence in the territories of the former Western Roman Empire. And we have to consider that in this, it wasn't much of an exception. We shouldn't be surprised that these experiments were successful. We should admire the intelligence of the peoples that managed this situation. But in general, we should conceive that, more or less, in order to give a government and to rule a certain area, a certain concord, let's say, a certain cooperation was always necessary. So there wasn't the barbarian, the fierce barbarian king who was a fool and wanted to enslave everyone and was evil. No, absolutely not. And in the same Italy, you find that before the Ostrogoths came in, the region was already being ruled by another Germanic king. That was Odoacer. I mean, the guy who took the Western imperial insignia, sent them back to Constantinople, put in formally, at least from his perspective, because it really didn't end there. The Western Roman, I can say empire. It's the Western Roman part that, because the empire technically, even if split in two, was always one. And Odoacer ruled Italy for 13 years, and this period was extremely peaceful. in Italy. It was a much better time than what had been under the last Roman emperors of Ravenna. We see that under Odoacer the Romano-Italic aristocracy kept the responsibility of the civil administration, while the army was entirely or almost entirely of Germanic ancestry. And this is a bit of a difference with what would have happened with the Ostrogoths, and even with before with other Germanic peoples, because Odoacer was not technically, a king of a people. He had been officially elected as Rex Gentium, which means basically king of various peoples, and these various peoples were essentially the barbarian groups that already existed in Italy before Romulus Augustulus was deposed in 476, and that already made up the officially Roman army of Italy. And Odoacer, which had been the chief of these groups, was properly elected as their king. And as it often happened, in Romano-Germanic countries, when the barbarians came, in order to maintain the army, the Germanic, let's say Germanic, but there were also other ethnicities, but let's say in this case at least broadly Germanic freemen, so the guys who made up the army, were given for their, in order to perform their military service, 1/3 of the Roman lands in the place. Now we're not really talking about, when we're talking about these lands, we're not talking about small farms where there was the guy who plowed the land for feeding his family. We're talking, especially in countries like Italy, where the late antique society had remained more or less intact. We're talking about large senatorial estates, so huge land holdings that, in this sense, from a chief that was at the top, like Odoacer or later Theodoric could be, were more easily manageable from the top, and more easily, I don't know how to say that, but it could be more easily distributed among the warriors, the freemen, which made up the army. How did the Ostrogoths came to Italy? Well, the Ostrogoths were ethnically originated in a very debated way as a people proper in the steppes of today's Ukraine. Yes, we're talking about the Goths as if, the myth that they came from Scandinavia, but that might have been just an original core, of which, by the way, we don't have many evidence in continuity with later Goths. They were mostly probably Germans mixed with a very heavy group of Iranic people, such as the Sarmatians and Hunnic elements, and along the way they got a lot of other guys and a lot of other people with them. But before migrating to Italy, they had already been settled more or less under the Eastern Roman guidance on the Middle Danube, and it's from this area that in the 80s of the 5th century the Roman Emperor Zeno sent them under the guide of their king Theodoric in Italy, in northern Italy first, so passing from the Balkans, passing the Alps and getting into northern Italy, to, in a certain sense, recover Italy on behalf of Constantinople. This is pretty interesting because you see that the Eastern Roman Empire, or better, the Roman Empire at the time, because the western part had vanished under Odoacer, wanted these peoples to actually behave on behalf of the Romans in those areas. So technically what Theodoric was doing by going to Italy and fighting Odoacer was to reconquer Italy for the Roman Empire, technically speaking. More prosaically, the Byzantines were actually pushing away a dangerous people from their borders and sending them into Italy, hoping to, control them in at least in a certain measure in the process. The military aspects of the Ostrogothic invasion of Italy are pretty scanty. We know that theoretically there's been this 3 years war, but probably things were a bit less harsh than it seems. Odoacer was killed by Theodoric, and therefore Theodoric fully got the control of Italy. And the first thing he did was to grant, as Odoacer had done, 1/3 of the Roman properties, land properties, to his Ostrogothic warriors. So we find this Ostrogothic presence scattered mostly in northern Italy and along the Apennine. And we're talking about around 100,000 Goths in a population of some millions of Romano-Italics. And so you understand that the Goths, the numbers were so small. Actually, the Ostrogoths were one of the largest peoples in this sense. Probably just the Longobards were like them, or even more later. There were demographically a few. Consider that the demographic crisis that had hit the Roman Empire was felt even among the barbarians. So they were in a common condition under many points of view. And when we look at these 100,000, we're looking at a minority, which, however, like it had happened during Odoacer with his Germanic tribes, his Germanic bands, better, that were in Italy as soldiers. They were an armed minority. They carried weapons. They had their own militarily, social, inner stratification, and from the other side, you find that the local population was actually, next to them, meaning that they had acquired the land. So the great senatorial aristocracy was managing now the economical resources of Italy together with the Ostrogoths, as well as the ecclesiastical organisms and other aspects of local business. However, there was a strict division between the military responsibility, which was given to the Goths, and the civil governors that remained embodied by the Romans. we can say that with the Ostrogoths, there is for the first time in the West a properly and fully Germanic army, because even under Odoacer, who had disbanded in a sense the Western Roman Empire, the army was still organized in a Roman fashion. With the Ostrogoths, the army became the Ostrogothic army. However, this doesn't mean that there were huge differences. The Ostrogothic army was organized obviously in a tribal way, but it still used tactics, equipment, infrastructures that the Romans had used in Italy, including the Fabricae Armorum, so the weaponry production that was still there. And therefore, we can say that the Ostrogoths fit in this picture in a quite functional way. The Romans, as I said, instead managed the Latin population. Obviously, the Ostrogoths were freemen, so they couldn't be, you know, they obeyed to the Germanic law, so they weren't under Roman control. The Roman local population was under the senatorial elite as before. And the very important aspect of Ostrogothic domination in this sense was that the Senate of Rome was integrated into into Ostrogothic politics. Theodoric was quite reverent and respectful towards the Roman Senate, which was a Romano-Italic Senate at this time, meaning that it represented more, the Italic landowner class rather than, a broader Roman universal dimension that obviously didn't exist anymore, so it was essentially an Italic Senate. But this Senate really was quite close to Theodoric in the administration of Italy. And thanks to Theodoric himself, this Senate acquired new prestige, because Theodoric, which had obviously become king of Italy, used counselors and ministries at his court that were drawn from the senatorial elite, and Theodoric made also use of the Senate in order to proclaim his deliberations, to, let's say, to sanction a little bit and to validate his authority, his rule through this purely Roman institution. And this was also, let's say, an international, a very bright international move, because remember that Theodoric had been sent to Italy as essentially I can't say a Roman general, but as someone that obeyed to the Roman Emperor in Constantinople. So by treating well the Roman Senate in Italy and treating well the Italic senatorial class, he was essentially keeping strong ties with the East, because Italy was still strongly in contact with Constantinople, even during the Ostrogothic rule. And even though Theodoric didn't recognize, obviously, as an Ostrogothic king, the preeminence, the formal preeminence at least, of the Eastern Roman Emperor, he still used his role into the Roman system to by interpreting it as a sort of honor prerogative. The idea that he had been chosen by Romans to perform what he had to do. So he had an attitude of someone who really felt in charge, who felt officialized in his role. So he, in a certain sense, he was saying, I'm here because I'm such a great king that the Romans even are giving me the permission to rule over their lands. And obviously this permission, this delegation has no value to me because I conquered Italy with my own army. I am fully the king of this place, but I still am respectful towards the Romans and still, getting their consensus. And it's very fascinating in this sense that the aristocracies of the Romans and of the Ostrogoths in Italy were represented together in the consistorium, so the consistory, the assembly that was that had seat in Ravenna, which was the king's assembly. So from one side you had the Romans, from the other side you had the Germans, and these obviously had a great meaning, not just because of the admirable relationship that there was between the two ethnical identities, but also because the consistorium in Ravenna was a sort of continuation of the imperial tradition, the one of the Sacrum Consistorium of the Roman Emperor in the capital. And this is really amazing. Which other Romano-Germanic kingdom do you know that actually had this form of organization? And the possibilities of the Roman aristocrats, the viri illustres, the illustrious men of the high, civil Roman bureaucracy, could sit next to a German king and to the Germanic king, and to comfort his political action, and could get even their own confidence. Now this is a forgotten chapter of Romano-Germanic coexistence. It's probably one of the most important, I believe possibly the most important of all. I mean, it's not that Gaul with the Franks or Spain with the Visigoths is less important. But compared to them, Italy was, the place where this coexistence had maintained a sort of full Roman administration under Ostrogothic rule. And a very pity is that, for Italy at least, that the Ostrogothic kingdom was eventually destroyed a few decades after Theodoric. And just imagine if that kingdom had continued. Italy was still rich, was still productive. It still had the demographical resources that had been strengthened by the Ostrogoths themselves. He had a huge power. Today I haven't talked about what was the strategical range of capability of the Ostrogoths in Italy. They really had a huge power. They even conquered parts of southern France. They controlled Illyricum. They put up in motion a very complex and strong diplomatic connection with Spain. It was really a great power for the time, and if the Byzantines had not later destroyed it, the destiny of Italy would have been very, very different during the Middle Ages and the rest of history. And we can just obviously speculate on it. But I never hear this said around, you know. Nobody seems to be particularly favorable to the Ostrogoths when thinking that they ruled Italy. You know, most of the people said, yeah, but they were like barbarians, so they were useless. They couldn't do anything good. They couldn't really build up a solid political entity. Well, no. And the rule of Theodoric does prove this. Yes, okay, it was a different moment. There hadn't been the plague of the mid-6th century that really reshaped much of the world in terms of demographics and economical capabilities. But let's say that Italy had, differently from other areas, ruled by Romano-Germanic entities, a solid political rule, a good army, wealth, and a great strategical range of, let's say, a great range of strategical options. So you'd say, well, why did it fail against the Byzantines? Well, that's another story. We will tell. I will tell about it another time. Just I think it was quite useful to talk about this time and to appreciate really how in the Ostrogothic administration of Italy the Roman part remained in charge while the army was fully a Germanic one, and the system did work, and it worked also pretty well. So thanks for